Welcome to a journey through time, where secrets of ancient Egypt unfold. From hidden tombs to engineering marvels, we'll explore 100 fascinating truths that shaped one of history's greatest civilizations. Get ready to discover mysteries, science, and stories that have lasted thousands of years, all brought to life in ways you've never imagined. Chapter 1. The Nile wasn't just a river. It was the heartbeat of ancient Egypt. Every year, its floods deposited fertile soil, turning the desert into farmland. Without this cycle, the civilization would never have thrived. Temples, villages, and massive cities relied on this natural rhythm. The Nile dictated life, religion, and even the calendar. Understanding its patterns gave priests power, as they predicted floods like ancient meteorologists. This river was more than water. It was destiny flowing through Egypt. Chapter 2. Pyramids weren't just tombs. They were astronomical machines. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal points, showing Egyptians' understanding of the stars. Some chambers point towards specific stars, linking death with the journey to the afterlife. Their precision is staggering. Millions of stones moved with no modern tools. Ancient science, engineering, and religion blended seamlessly here. These structures weren't built for mere spectacle. They were a bridge between humans and the cosmos. Chapter 3. Hieroglyphs weren't just decorative writing. They were a sophisticated system, combining symbols, sounds, and ideas. Each image carried layers of meaning, often blending art with information. Priests used them for sacred texts, while scribes recorded daily life. Deciphering them is like unlocking a time capsule of knowledge, science, and culture. The Rosetta Stone was the key, revealing the logic and patterns behind this symbolic language. Every hieroglyph tells a story, connecting modern scholars to ancient minds. Chapter 4. Mummification was an ancient experiment in preservation. Egyptians discovered chemicals and techniques that could stop decay almost completely. Natron, a natural salt, dried bodies efficiently, while resins and oils protected tissue. This process wasn't random. It reflected deep knowledge of biology and chemistry for its time. Mummies weren't just for the dead. They symbolized immortality, a science meets spirituality approach. Each bandage, each layer of oil and resin was carefully applied to secure eternity. Death became a controlled, deliberate ritual. Chapter 5. Obelisks were more than monumental stones, they were solar clocks. Carved from a single piece of granite, they absorbed sunlight, casting shadows that measured time and marked seasons. Pharaohs used them to assert power, aligning them with temples and the sun god Ra. These structures required engineering mastery, quarrying, transporting, and erecting massive stones with no cranes. Obelisks represented knowledge, devotion, and ambition, linking science, art, and engineering mastery and politics in one vertical monument. Chapter 6. The Sphinx guards more than pyramids. It guards secrets of mathematics. Its proportions suggest advanced geometry knowledge. Some researchers argue its measurements relate to pi, or the Earth's dimensions. Carved from limestone, it required both artistic skill and mathematical precision. The lion's body and human face symbolize power and intelligence. Egyptians didn't just sculpt, they calculated, integrating science into art. The Sphinx remains an enigma, a silent teacher of engineering and symbolic mastery. Chapter 7. Pharaohs weren't kings, they were living gods. Their authority combined politics, religion, and science. They performed rituals that stabilized society and maintained cosmic order, called Ma'at, temples, laws. monuments all reinforced this belief. But their divine status wasn't merely symbolic. It gave them access to scientific knowledge, astronomy, medicine, and engineering secrets. Understanding the pharaoh was understanding Egypt itself, a civilization where leadership, religion, and science were inseparable. Chapter 8. The Egyptian calendar was surprisingly accurate. Based on lunar and solar cycles, it predicted floods and agricultural seasons. Priests tracked stars and used observations to create one of the earliest functional calendars. This knowledge directly influenced farming, festivals, and rituals. Astronomy wasn't abstract. It dictated survival. They mapped constellations, tracked solstices, and calculated time in ways that astound modern scholars. Ancient Egyptians were not just builders. They were timekeepers, masters of celestial rhythms. Chapter 9. Papyrus wasn't just paper. It was a revolution in communication. This plant-based material allowed Egyptians to record medicine, math, and literature. Knowledge could be shared across generations, preserved in scrolls that survived millennia. Recipes, engineering instructions, and religious texts were all written on papyrus. Its invention changed civilization, enabling administration, learning, and culture. This simple plant carried complex ideas, a bridge between nature and human intellect, preserving ancient wisdom for the modern world. Chapter 10. Temples were laboratories of light and acoustics. Their architecture amplified chants, controlled airflow, and captured sunlight at precise moments. Certain chambers aligned with celestial events, creating dramatic visual and sound effects during rituals. Priests understood physics intuitively, using reflection, shadow, and resonance. Every carving, every pillar had purpose. Temples weren't just religious, they were experiments in perception and engineering. Worship and science merged, creating spaces that inspired awe while demonstrating practical knowledge. Chapter 11. Egyptian medicine was surprisingly advanced. Doctors used herbs, honey, and minerals to treat wounds and illnesses. They performed basic surgeries and set broken bones. Records on papyrus reveal a combination of observation, trial, and logic. Some treatments even anticipated modern techniques. Medicine wasn't just practical. It was tied to religion, with prayers enhancing healing. Their approach blended science and spirituality, showing the sophistication of ancient healthcare. Chapter 12. The Nile Delta was a hub of biodiversity. Egyptians studied plants, fish, and animals for food, medicine, and rituals. They domesticated cats and dogs, tamed cattle, and used papyrus for construction. Observing nature informed agriculture and architecture. Their daily life depended on understanding the environment, making them early ecologists. Animals were not only companions but also symbols of gods, linking observation, utility, and belief in seamless harmony. Chapter 13. Amulets weren't just charms. They contained protective knowledge. Crafted from stones, metals, and faience, they were designed using geometry and symbolism. Each symbol held meaning: the scarab for rebirth, the eye for protection. Egyptians believed these objects could influence energy, ward off disease, and connect with divine forces. Science met superstition in tangible form. Wearing an amulet was a small experiment in physics, chemistry, and psychology, embedded in everyday life. Chapter 14. The Valley of the Kings was more than a burial site. Hidden chambers protected Pharaoh's secrets, with labyrinths and traps designed to confuse tomb robbers. Layouts reflected astronomy, mythology, and engineering. Walls lined with hieroglyphs preserved knowledge of rituals and history. Architects optimized air circulation and stability. Each tomb was a controlled environment, blending science and spirituality. Death became a calculated journey, an architectural marvel preserving eternity. Chapter 15. Egyptians understood water management like engineers. Canals, reservoirs, and dikes directed Nile floods to farmland. They created irrigation systems that increased crop yield and controlled erosion, observing patterns. They predicted seasonal changes, preventing famine. Water wasn't taken for granted. It was measured, channeled, and sacred. Their engineering combined physics and environmental knowledge, sustaining cities and civilizations in one of the harshest deserts on Earth. Chapter 16. Gold wasn't just wealth, it was eternal. Egyptians valued it for its luster and resistance to corrosion. They believed it connected mortals with gods, particularly the sun god Ra. Gold was used in masks, jewelry, and temples, often alloyed with copper to create color effects. Beyond symbolism, metallurgy shows they understood chemical reactions, melting points, and alloys. Gold represented beauty, power, and early chemistry combined in divine form. Chapter 17. Obsidian mirrors reveal Egyptian optics knowledge. Polished stones reflected light and were used in rituals and daily grooming. Mirrors weren't just functional, they symbolized self-awareness, divinity, and truth. Creating a reflective surface required precision grinding and polishing. Egyptians understood reflection angles intuitively. These mirrors combined art, science, and spirituality, showing an early grasp of physics in practical objects. Chapter 18. The Book of the Dead wasn't fiction. It was a survival manual for the afterlife. Scrolls guided souls through tests, obstacles, and moral decisions. Spells and illustrations were carefully designed to protect and guide. Egyptians believed knowledge could be preserved and transmitted across life and death. Writing these texts required literacy, observation, and careful planning. The combination of storytelling, instruction, and ritual made this a remarkable blend of education, psychology, and spiritual science. Chapter 19. Pharaohs used perfumes and oils as more than luxury. They created fragrances from plants, resins, and minerals. Mixing scents required chemistry knowledge, heating, blending, and preserving delicate compounds. Perfumes had religious and therapeutic roles, enhancing rituals and treating ailments. Egyptians understood evaporation, extraction, and preservation in an era with no laboratories. Scents were science in disguise, enriching life, religion. Chapter 20. Ancient Egyptian boats were masterpieces of engineering. Papyrus and wood boats floated along the Nile, connecting cities and trade networks. Designs accounted for currents, weight distribution, and sail dynamics. Some boats transported sacred statues in religious ceremonies, blending function with ritual. Mastery of materials, balance, and navigation reflects practical science. Egyptians weren't just river travelers, they were naval engineers. Combining physics, craftsmanship, and spirituality on the water. Chapter 21. The Great Library of Alexandria had predecessors in Egypt. Temples stored scrolls on medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. Scribes cataloged knowledge meticulously. Libraries were centers of science, not just religion. Preserving texts required understanding humidity, heat, and materials like papyrus. Knowledge wasn't just recorded, it was curated. Ancient Egyptians created systems to pass discoveries to generations, blending logic, organization, and scholarship in ways that influenced future civilizations. Chapter 22. Cats weren't just pets, they were guardians. Egyptians domesticated cats to control rodents, protecting food stores and papyrus libraries. Revered as sacred, they were linked to the goddess Bastet. Observing their hunting behavior revealed ecological knowledge. Cats shaped daily life, science, and religion simultaneously. Egyptians understood how introducing a predator could stabilize environments, a practical lesson in biology disguised as devotion. Chapter 23. Egyptian cosmetics were early chemistry experiments. Malachite and coal were ground into powders, mixed with oils for eyeliner and eye protection. These formulas blocked sun glare, reduced infections, and indicated social status. Understanding minerals, mixing techniques, and hygiene shows their practical application of chemistry. Beauty, medicine, and science intertwined in daily routines, demonstrating that aesthetics could coexist with functional knowledge in ancient life. Chapter 24. Obelisks were also communication devices. Carved inscriptions transmitted messages across time, declaring victories, laws, and devotion to gods. Their height ensured visibility from miles away. Erecting them required knowledge of weight distribution, leverage, and geometry. They, too, combined physics, politics, and religion in a single vertical monument. These stones broadcasted both information and ideology, showing early integration of science and communication. Chapter 25. The Egyptian calendar included leap years before modern Europe. Priests tracked solar and lunar cycles, adjusting the calendar for accuracy. This understanding of astronomy was critical for predicting floods and agricultural planning. They mapped stars and tracked solstices to synchronize rituals and farming. Their observations were empirical, methodical, and precise, demonstrating an early scientific approach to time management that ensured survival and societal stability. Chapter 26. The scarab beetle symbolized rebirth and cycles. Egyptians observed the dung beetle rolling balls of soil and linked it to the sun's movement. This connection shows keen observation of nature. Influencing religion. Scarabs became amulets, protecting individuals while conveying cosmic understanding. Science, symbolism, and daily life merged in one small beetle, showing how observation of the natural world informed culture and spirituality simultaneously. Chapter 27. Ancient Egyptians mapped stars and constellations for navigation. They tracked the heliacal rising of Sirius to predict the Nile flood. Temples and pyramids aligned with key celestial bodies, reflecting precise astronomical knowledge. Observation, measurement, and alignment demonstrate early physics and math understanding. Egyptians used science to organize society, agriculture, and religion, proving that stars weren't just decoration. They were essential guides for survival. Chapter 28. Feluccas, small sailboats, were engineered for efficiency. Lightweight and maneuverable, they exploited the Nile's winds and currents. Egyptians observed water flow, wind patterns, and balance to optimize design. Boats weren't just transportation. They were tools of commerce, communication, and ritual. Practical physics guided construction, showing that even leisure and daily work relied on applied scientific observation. Chapter 29. Ancient Egyptian music was mathematical. Instruments like harps, flutes, and drums followed specific ratios to produce harmonious sounds. Music was essential in rituals, storytelling, and healing. Sound vibrations influenced human psychology and spiritual experiences. Understanding resonance, rhythm, and materials shows they applied physics intuitively. Music was more than art. It was science, culture, and therapy combined, enhancing both communal and religious life. Chapter 30. The art of embalming included chemical knowledge. Natron dried bodies, while resins and oils prevented decay. These substances were carefully selected for their chemical properties. Embalming combined biology, chemistry, and ritual precision. Priests monitored each step to ensure preservation, creating an experimental approach to immortality. Egyptian mummification demonstrates that science and spirituality could coexist seamlessly, transforming death into a controlled, systematic process with lasting cultural impact. Chapter 31, Egyptian hieroglyphic ink, was carefully formulated. Soot, plant extracts, and minerals created long-lasting colors. Scribes mixed water and gum arabic to ensure smooth writing. Ink chemistry mattered. Poor formulas could fade quickly. Each scroll was a combination of art and science, preserving history for thousands of years. Egyptians mastered material properties without modern labs, proving that knowledge of chemistry and natural resources was integral to communication and record-keeping. Chapter 32. The pyramids of Giza contain hidden chambers and passages still not fully explored. Archaeologists use radar and ground-penetrating techniques to reveal unknown spaces. Some may hold tools, artifacts, or clues about construction methods. The precision of these internal structures suggests advanced engineering and spatial awareness. These hidden spaces combine mystery, architecture, and applied physics, showing Egyptians' remarkable understanding of design and planning, blending science with sacred purpose. Chapter 33. Egyptian astronomy influenced religious festivals. Observing the moon, sun, and stars dictated ceremonial dates. Temples often aligned with celestial events, enhancing the spiritual experience. Priests calculated solstices and equinoxes with surprising accuracy. Science guided tradition, connecting the cosmos with human activity. Ancient Egyptians didn't separate observation from faith. Astronomy was a tool to understand time, life cycles, and divine patterns, making rituals scientifically informed and culturally meaningful. Chapter 34. Ancient Egyptians built roads using compacted sand and stones. These pathways connected cities, temples, and quarries. Engineers understood load distribution, material strength, and erosion prevention. Roads facilitated trade, communication, and monument construction. Planning required surveying and geometry, anticipating weight and transport needs. Infrastructure was a silent science lesson. Knowledge of materials, physics, and logistics combined to shape civilization, proving that mobility and engineering were as important as art and religion. Chapter 35. Egyptian jewelry reflected metallurgical skill. Gold, silver, and copper were hammered, alloyed, and inlaid with stones. Jewelry wasn't just decoration. It indicated status, protected spiritually, and demonstrated chemistry understanding. Craftsmen controlled melting points, combined metals, and ensured durability. Every necklace and bracelet shows aesthetic taste combined with technical mastery. Jewelry represents a balance of beauty, science, and motion mechanics. Charioteers needed skill and precision to optimize speed and control. This invention combined physics, engineering, and strategy. The chariot exemplifies how Egyptians applied scientific understanding practically, blending technology, military tactics, and leadership to maintain power and influence. Chapter 37. Ancient Egyptian mathematics included fractions, geometry, and basic algebra. They calculated areas for fields, volumes for grain storage, and dimensions for monuments. Measurement was precise, essential for construction and taxation. Math wasn't abstract, it had direct, practical applications. Scribes used it for planning architecture, trade, and irrigation. Egyptians applied numbers to real-world problems, demonstrating that their civilization was deeply analytical, logical, and systematically organized in daily and monumental life. Chapter 38. Egyptian glassmakers were chemical innovators. Mixing sand, plant ash, and minerals, they produced colored glass for beads, vessels, and windows. Controlling heat and composition required careful experimentation. Glass was decorative, functional, and symbolic. These artisans understood material reactions centuries before formal chemistry existed. Glassmaking combined art, engineering, and science, showcasing Egyptians' prestige. Skill in transforming raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. Chapter 39. Ancient Egyptians studied human anatomy through mummification. Dissection and observation allowed them to understand organs, veins, and bones. This knowledge informed medicine, surgery, and embalming practices. Priests applied practical science when preserving bodies. Using chemicals and techniques to prevent decay, anatomy became both a tool for life and death, linking empirical observation with ritual, demonstrating that curiosity and science were embedded in religious and practical activities. Chapter 40. Egyptian boats sometimes traveled to the Red Sea and beyond. Maritime exploration required knowledge of currents, wind patterns, and navigation. Sailors observed stars, tides, and coastal geography to travel safely. Trade, diplomacy, and resource acquisition depended on this expertise. Boats were more than transportation. They were lessons in applied physics, environmental observation, and logistics. Egyptians combined engineering, natural science, and experience to master the Nile and the seas beyond. Using chemicals and techniques to prevent decay, anatomy became both a tool for life and death, linking empirical observation with ritual, demonstrating that curiosity and science were embedded in religious and practical activities. Chapter 40. Egyptian boats sometimes traveled to the Red Sea and beyond. Maritime exploration required knowledge of currents, wind patterns, and navigation. Sailors observed stars, tides, and coastal geography to travel safely. Trade, diplomacy, and resource acquisition depended on this expertise. Boats were more than transportation. They were lessons in applied physics, environmental observation, and logistics. Egyptians combined engineering, natural science, and experience to master the Nile and the seas beyond. Egyptians mastered taste, nutrition, and preservation. Beer illustrates how science and culture intersected in practical, everyday life. Chapter 43. The pyramid's internal ventilation shows applied physics. Air shafts align precisely with stars and provide airflow to into internal chambers. Builders considered air pressure, temperature, and stone density. This wasn't accidental. It reflects sophisticated planning and understanding of natural forces. Ancient architects combined geometry, astronomy, and environmental knowledge to ensure comfort, ritual effectiveness, and structural integrity. Science was embedded in design, turning monumental tombs into engineering marvels. Chapter 44. Egyptians observed the sun's movement to develop sundials. These early timekeeping tools used shadows and angles to track hours. Priests, farmers, and architects relied on precise timing for rituals, irrigation, and construction. Creating sundials required geometry, measurement, and observational skills. This blend of science and daily life shows that understanding nature was critical for survival. Ancient Egyptians measured time accurately, blending mathematics, astronomy, and practical necessity. Chapter 45. The Egyptian embalming process included brain removal through the nasal cavity. This method preserved facial structure for mummification. Priests used hooks, natron, and precise timing to prevent decomposition. Understanding anatomy and chemical reactions was essential. Mummification combined religious belief with empirical experimentation, ensuring both spiritual and physical preservation. Ancient Egyptians applied biological knowledge methodically, turning death into a scientific and ceremonial process that endured for thousands of years. Chapter 46. Temple columns weren't just architectural supports. They contained symbolic and scientific design. Lotus and papyrus capitals mirrored plant growth, connecting nature and religion. Proportions, weight distribution, and spacing reveal understanding of load-bearing physics. Temples aligned with celestial events, enhancing rituals with light and shadow effects. Columns became lessons in geometry, biology, and astronomy. Architecture merged aesthetics, science, and spirituality seamlessly, demonstrating Egyptians' holistic approach to design. Chapter 47. The Egyptians created glass beads and ornaments using precise heating techniques. By controlling temperature, artisans could produce color variations and durability. Chemical knowledge of minerals and heat reactions was applied practically. Glass wasn't merely decorative. It carried cultural, ritual, and economic significance. This craft demonstrates early materials science, experimental thinking, and artistic innovation. Egyptians transformed raw resources into objects combining beauty, symbolism, and functional science. Chapter 48. Ancient Egyptian medical texts detailed treatments using plants, minerals, and oils. Remedies addressed wounds, infections, and digestive issues. Procedures involved observation, testing, and precise measurement. Some remedies anticipated modern pharmacology. Knowledge of dosage, preparation, and reuse, and application shows empirical methodology. Medicine, religion, and science coexisted. Healing was both spiritual and practical. Egyptians' systematic medical practices reveal a sophisticated understanding of the human body and natural remedies. Chapter 49. The Egyptian solar bark was a ceremonial boat used in religious rituals. Constructed from wood and papyrus, it symbolized the sun god's journey across the sky. Engineering ensured stability, buoyancy, and maneuverability. Observing currents and wind patterns influenced design. The bark was both a spiritual and technical achievement, demonstrating how religion, physics, and craftsmanship intersected. These boats carried gods, rituals, and knowledge, illustrating science applied to faith and symbolism. Chapter 50: Egyptian Astronomy Guided Agriculture. Farmers observed star positions to predict Nile floods and planting seasons. Sirius 6, heliacal rising, signaled the inundation, ensuring crops thrived. Knowledge of celestial cycles reduced risk of famine and supported civilization growth. Astronomy wasn't abstract, it was essential for survival. Egyptians combined careful observation, pattern recognition, and record-keeping. Science and society were inseparable, with the stars directing human activity, agriculture, and ritual life. Chapter 51: The ancient Egyptians used astronomy to align pyramids precisely with the cardinal points. Observing stars, they calculated north without compasses. Techniques included measuring shadows and tracking circumpolar stars. This knowledge reflects advanced spatial awareness and observation skills. Aligning massive structures with celestial bodies required both mathematics and patience. Science and religion combined as orientation connected pharaohs. Tools enabled construction of monuments, irrigation systems, and daily objects. Metalwork wasn't just practical, it demonstrated social status and innovation. Egyptians transformed raw minerals into functional and symbolic objects, blending science, technology, and artistry. Chapter 53: The ancient Egyptians understood basic hydraulics. Canals, locks, and irrigation channels controlled water flow for farming and city life. Engineers observed gradients, soil permeability, and water volume. Effective planning ensured crops thrived and cities prospered. Knowledge of physics and natural forces was applied systematically. Water management was both practical and sacred, as the Nile was divine. Egyptians turned environmental observation into engineering solutions, ensuring civilization could flourish in the desert. Chapter 54: Egyptian medicine included dentistry. Archaeological evidence shows drilled teeth and dental treatments using obsidian tools. Knowledge of pain management, hygiene, and anatomy was applied carefully. Medical practices combined observation, trial, and ritual. Priests and physicians documented methods on papyrus, ensuring consistency and knowledge transfer. Dentistry reflects Egyptians' empirical approach to health, combining chemistry, anatomy, and precision to address everyday challenges with practical science. Chapter 55: The ancient Egyptians mapped the stars to track time and seasons. Constellations like Orion and Sirius guided rituals and agricultural planning. Observing the sky required patience, accuracy, and pattern recognition. Temples and pyramids were aligned with celestial events, blending astronomy and architecture. Star knowledge connected religion, science, and daily life. Egyptians applied empirical observation to understand natural cycles, integrating cosmic patterns into the foundation of civilization. Chapter 56: Egyptian mathematics enabled monumental construction. Geometry calculated pyramid dimensions, angles, and volume. Surveyors measured land, canals, and fields with precision. Fractions and ratios guided planning, ensuring proportional and stable structures. Math had direct application in architecture, agriculture, and administration. This practical approach shows Egyptians were analytical problem solvers, combining observation, calculation, and experimentation to transform desert landscapes into thriving urban and ceremonial spaces. Chapter 57. Ancient Egyptian Astronomy Influenced Navigation on the Nile. Sailors used stars to guide nighttime travel. Observing wind, currents, and celestial positions allowed long-distance trade and communication. Knowledge of the heavens was both scientific and practical. Boats were designed to maximize efficiency, balance, and speed. Egyptians combined observation, engineering, and applied physics to master river travel, showing a sophisticated understanding of the natural environment and technological innovation in daily life. Chapter 58. The Egyptians used chemistry in cosmetics. Malachite and galena were ground into eye makeup with antiseptic and sun-protective properties. Mixing minerals and oils required precise measurements and experimentation. Cosmetics reflected status, ritual significance, and practical health benefits. This practice combined chemistry, medicine, and aesthetics. Beauty, hygiene, and science merged seamlessly, showing Egyptians' practical understanding of materials, health, and social communication. Chapter 59. Ancient Egyptian statues incorporated geometry and proportion. Sculptors used grids and measurement systems to create symmetry and balance. Understanding material properties like limestone and granite was essential. Some statues aligned with sunlight and shadow for dramatic effect. These practices show knowledge of physics, mathematics, and aesthetics. Statues weren't just art. They communicated power, religion, and human understanding of form, blending empirical observation with cultural symbolism. Chapter 60. The Egyptians developed early medical tools. Scalpels, probes, and needles were made from copper, bronze, or obsidian. Instruments were designed for precision in surgery, embalming, and daily healthcare. Understanding sharpness, strength, and sterilization shows applied material science. Tools reflect practical problem-solving combined with empirical experimentation. Medicine in Egypt was hands-on, blending observation, innovation, and ritual to ensure survival, health, and cultural continuity. Chapter 61. Egyptian irrigation relied on shadoofs, simple machines to lift water from canals to fields. Using counterweights and levers, farmers maximized efficiency with minimal effort. Understanding balance, force, and gravity was intuitive yet precise. This technology supported agriculture, ensuring food security for growing cities. Ancient Egyptians applied physics practically, showing that science wasn't abstract, it was embedded in daily life, blending observation, innovation, and survival strategies seamlessly. Chapter 62. The Egyptian embalming process revealed anatomical knowledge. Organs were removed, preserved, and stored in canopic jars, while the heart often remained for spiritual reasons. Chemicals like natron dried tissues effectively. Priests practiced systematic methods that prevented decay and preserved form. Embalming combined biology, chemistry, and ritual precision. Through this process, Egyptians transformed death into an engineered experience, demonstrating how science and spirituality could coexist harmoniously. Chapter 63. Egyptian astronomy guided temple design. Temples aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and star risings to enhance rituals. Sunlight illuminated statues and altars at precise times. Architects applied observation, geometry, and calculation to ensure celestial alignment. Science was embedded in religious experience, transforming buildings into instruments of light and time. Egyptians understood the heavens practically, using astronomy to structure sacred spaces and connect mortals with divine cycles. Chapter 64. Ancient Egyptian medicine included herbal pharmacology. Plants like garlic, myrrh, and willow were used to treat infections and pain. Priests documented recipes on papyrus with precise measurements. Observation, experimentation, and trial-guided treatments. Some remedies align with modern scientific findings, demonstrating empirical knowledge. Medicine blended practical chemistry with spirituality, showing Egyptians' ability to apply natural resources to enhance health and longevity systematically. Chapter 65. The Great Pyramid's internal chambers reflect structural engineering mastery. Massive stones were placed to distribute weight evenly and prevent collapse. Architects considered pressure, friction, and balance without modern tools. Corridors and passages show spatial planning, ventilation, and geometry. Science was applied to ensure longevity. These monuments weren't merely symbolic, they were experiments in physics and construction, demonstrating that ancient Egyptians combined engineering, mathematics, and ritual purpose in every stone. Chapter 66. Ancient Egyptians studied animal behavior for agriculture and religion. Observing cats, oxen, and birds provided insights into breeding, pest control, and symbolic meaning. Animals influenced diet, economy, and spiritual practice. Practical science merged with observation and ritual. Egyptians transformed natural behavior into knowledge applied to daily life, trade, and culture, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of ecology and biology that informed civilization long before formal science existed. Chapter 67. Egyptian glass production required temperature control and chemical knowledge. Minerals were melted and mixed to produce colored beads and vessels. Heat, composition, and timing had to be precise. Artisans achieved consistent quality through experimentation. Glass objects weren't merely decorative, they carried economic, religious, and social significance. Egyptians combined chemistry, physics, and aesthetics, creating durable and beautiful artifacts, demonstrating their advanced understanding of materials and applied science. Chapter 68. Hieroglyphs recorded science and daily life. Scribes documented medicine, engineering, etc., astronomy, and rituals with precision. Symbols conveyed practical knowledge alongside storytelling. Writing on papyrus required careful ink formulation and material understanding. Communication wasn't abstract, it preserved empirical observation and experimentation. Hieroglyphs allowed knowledge to survive centuries, showing that Egyptians valued accuracy, documentation, and education as tools to advance culture and maintain continuity. Chapter 69. The Nile's flooding cycle shaped agriculture and science. Farmers tracked water levels, timing planting to optimize yields. Observing seasonal patterns required empirical methods and record-keeping. The river dictated life, influencing religion, economy, and society. Egyptians developed canals, dikes, and reservoirs to manage flow. This applied hydrology ensured stability and survival. Understanding natural cycles allowed civilization to thrive in an otherwise harsh desert. Merging observation, engineering, and environmental science. Chapter 70. Egyptian jewelry incorporated geometry and symbolism. Designs included scarabs, lotus, and hieroglyphs, reflecting spiritual and mathematical understanding. Metals and stones were combined with precision, considering melting points, hardness, and aesthetics. Jewelry wasn't merely decorative. It communicated status, protected spiritually, and demonstrated craftsmanship. Science, art, and symbolism merged seamlessly. Egyptians applied chemistry, physics, and mathematics to create objects that were functional, beautiful, and meaningful in cultural and ritual contexts. Chapter 71. Ancient Egyptian boats were engineered for both function and ceremony. Lightweight, balanced, and designed for currents, they transported goods, people, and sacred statues. Sailors observed wind patterns, water depth, and river behavior to optimize travel. These vessels reflect applied physics, navigation skills, and practical engineering. Boats were not just transportation. They symbolized power, trade, and ritual, blending science, art, and spirituality in daily life and ceremonial contexts. Chapter 72. The Egyptian solar boat represents the journey of Ra across the sky. Constructed from wood and papyrus, it was both functional and symbolic. Stability, buoyancy, and structural design required knowledge of materials and weight distribution. Solar boats accompanied pharaohs in rituals and burials, demonstrating the connection between engineering and belief. Egyptians applied physics, observation, and craftsmanship to express spirituality, turning boats into floating instruments of science and faith. Chapter 73. Ancient Egyptians mastered textile production. Flax was harvested, spun, and woven into linen, using knowledge of plant fibers and tension. Fabrics were bleached, dyed, and tailored with precision. Clothing signified status, ritual, and protection from the harsh sun. Textile production combined botany, chemistry, and mechanical processes. Egyptians applied observation and experimentation to optimize fibers, demonstrating that practical science permeated even daily life, blending utility with cultural and religious significance. Chapter 74. The alignment of temples with stars shows advanced astronomy. Priests observed heliacal risings and tracked celestial movements to schedule rituals. Temple orientation maximized sunlight at prepaz. Significant moments, creating dramatic visual effects. Knowledge of geometry, light angles, and celestial cycles guided construction. Science and religion intertwined, enhancing spiritual experience while demonstrating empirical understanding of the sky. Egyptians applied observation and mathematics to architecture, connecting the heavens with earthly structures. Chapter 75. Egyptian medicine included early surgical procedures. Archaeological evidence shows trepanation, suturing, and wound care. Tools were crafted from copper, bronze, and obsidian, designed for precision. Practitioners understood anatomy, hygiene, and pain management. Medical texts documented steps and remedies systematically. Surgery wasn't abstract experimentation. It relied on observation, knowledge of materials, and practical techniques. Egyptians combined science, craftsmanship, and ritual to maintain health, blending empirical and spiritual approaches effectively. Chapter 76. Ancient Egyptians brewed wine using grapes, yeast, and fermentation control. Temperature, timing, and cleanliness influenced quality. Wine was used in rituals, offerings, and daily life. Brewing required observation, experimentation, and knowledge of natural chemical processes. Recipes were recorded on papyrus, showing systematic methodology. Wine production illustrates practical chemistry, applied biology, and cultural significance. Science was embedded in culinary practices, demonstrating Egyptians' ability to combine experimentation, observation, and tradition. Chapter 77, obelisks captured sunlight and aligned with celestial bodies, their height and placement. Amplified shadow effects, marking time and seasons. Carving and erecting massive stones required knowledge of leverage, balance, and material strength. Obelisks communicated religious devotion and scientific mastery simultaneously. Egyptians applied physics, geometry, and astronomy practically, creating monuments that instructed, inspired, and measured, blending observation with engineering and symbolism. Chapter 78, Ancient Egyptian Astronomy, tracked the movement of planets and stars. Priests observed Mars, Venus, and Jupiter to predict seasons and ritual timing. Observation required patience, measurement, and systematic record-keeping. Knowledge was applied to agriculture, navigation, and religious ceremonies. Astronomy wasn't abstract, it was practical, guiding daily life and societal organization. Egyptians combined observation, mathematics, and pattern recognition, creating a civilization synchronized with the cosmos. Chapter 79, Egyptian glassmakers experimented with color, heat, and material composition. Minerals like copper and cobalt created vibrant hues. Artisans controlled furnace temperature and timing to achieve desired results. Glass objects were used for decoration, ritual, and trade. This craft demonstrates early chemistry knowledge and precision engineering. Egyptians applied observation, experimentation, and creativity to transform raw materials into functional, beautiful, and culturally significant objects, blending science and art seamlessly. Chapter 80, The Nile's seasonal flooding influenced urban planning. Cities and temples were constructed to withstand high water, while canals and dikes directed excess flow. Observation of water patterns, soil composition, and flood timing guided infrastructure design. Egyptians applied hydrology, civil engineering, and environmental science practically. Urban planning was not only functional, but sacred, reflecting understanding of nature's forces. Science and daily life merged, ensuring civilization thrived in one of Earth's most challenging landscapes. Chapter 81, Ancient Egyptian jewelry combined aesthetics with chemistry. Gold, silver, and copper were alloyed, hammered, and polished into intricate designs. Gemstones were cut, drilled, and inlaid using precision tools. Jewelry symbolized status, spirituality, and protection. Metallurgical knowledge ensured durability and shine. Egyptians experimented with materials, temperatures, and techniques, merging art, chemistry, and symbolism. These small objects reveal practical science applied to culture, fashion, and ritual in daily life. Chapter 82, The Egyptians measured time using water clocks. Flowing water and calibrated containers marked hours precisely. These devices required understanding fluid dynamics, volume, and gravity. Timekeeping was critical for agriculture, rituals, and administration. Priests and engineers observed patterns and refined designs, combining observation with practical physics. Water clocks illustrate that Egyptians applied scientific principles to daily needs, integrating measurement, engineering, and societal organization seamlessly. Chapter 83. Egyptian embalming included heart preservation for spiritual purposes. Chemical treatments prevented decay while retaining structure. Priests applied formulas using natron, resins, and oils. Understanding drying processes and chemical interactions ensured long-term preservation. Embalming combined biology, chemistry, and ritual, showing systematic experimentation and observation. Egyptians engineered death, transforming it into a controlled process that blended spirituality with science, demonstrating meticulous planning and applied empirical knowledge. Chapter 84. Temples were aligned to capture sunlight dramatically during solstices and equinoxes. Architects calculated angles, distances, and shadows for visual impact. Light illuminated statues and altars at key moments. Astronomy, geometry, and engineering were applied to enhance religious experience. Science and spirituality merged, turning architecture into a tool to teach, inspire, and guide. Egyptians understood celestial patterns practically, designing sacred spaces as instruments of light and time. Chapter 85. Ancient Egyptian medicine included practical dentistry. Evidence shows tooth extraction, drilling, and treatments for decay using obsidian tools. Knowledge of anatomy, hygiene, and material properties guided procedures. Written records detailed methods systematically. Dentistry reflects empirical experimentation, applied chemistry, and precision engineering. Egyptians approached health with observation, problem-solving, and ritual, demonstrating that science and medicine were integrated with cultural and spiritual practices for everyday life. Chapter 86. The Nile's delta supported diverse ecosystems. Egyptians observed birds, fish, and plants for food, medicine, and construction. Understanding seasonal migration, growth cycles, and natural behavior guided agriculture and ritual. Nature was a laboratory for practical knowledge. Ecological observation informed sustainable practices, pest control, and crop planning. Science... Daily life and religion merged, showing that Egyptians applied environmental understanding systematically to support civilization in a challenging desert ecosystem. Chapter 87. Hieroglyphic inscriptions recorded engineering knowledge. Pyramids, temples, and canals were described with precise measurements. Symbols conveyed dimensions, materials, and techniques. Scribes documented methods for future generations, preserving practical science. Writing allowed knowledge to be shared, refined, and replicated. Egyptians combined literacy, mathematics, and engineering in a system of communication that ensured accuracy and continuity. Knowledge wasn't lost. It was encoded in artful symbols for thousands of years. Chapter 88. Ancient Egyptian musical instruments demonstrated acoustic science. Harps, flutes, and drums were designed with proportional dimensions to produce harmonic sounds. Musicians observed vibration, resonance, and rhythm for ritual and entertainment. Music influenced psychology, ceremony, and healing. Creating instruments required knowledge of material properties, tension, and airflow. Science, art, and spirituality merged seamlessly. Egyptians understood sound practically, turning music into an empirical and cultural tool. Chapter 89. Obelisks acted as astronomical markers. Shadows indicated solstices, seasons, and ritual timing. Placement required understanding sunlight angles, stone density, and stability. Carving and erecting massive monoliths demanded physics and engineering knowledge. Obelisks communicated devotion, power, and scientific mastery simultaneously. Egyptians combined geometry, astronomy, and material science, creating structures that instructed, inspired, and measured, showing deep integration of science into religious and civic life. Chapter 90. Egyptian beer was both nourishment and science. Brewing involved barley, yeast, fermentation control, and temperature management. Recipes on papyrus detailed proportions, steps, and timing. Fermentation was an early experiment in microbiology and chemistry. Beer fueled laborers, supported rituals, and traded economically. Observation and methodical experimentation ensured consistent quality. Egyptians combined science, culture, and daily life, demonstrating practical knowledge applied to food, health, and society. Chapter 91. The Great Pyramid stones were quarried with copper tools, ropes, and levers. Workers used ramps and sleds, observing friction, weight, and force. Precision placement required geometry and careful measurement. Each block aligned to millimeters, demonstrating applied engineering and physics. Egyptians transformed raw stone into eternal monuments, blending mathematics, labor management, and innovation. Construction was both a technical and spiritual achievement, showing how science, human skill, and belief created lasting structures. Chapter 92. The Nile's predictable flooding influenced the Egyptian calendar. Priests observed Sirius and other stars to forecast inundation. Accurate prediction ensured agriculture, rituals, and food storage. Calendars combined astronomy, observation, and mathematics. Timekeeping guided daily life and long-term planning. Egyptians weren't just farmers. They were early astronomers, applying empirical methods to manage resources. Celestial patterns became practical tools, merging survival, science, and spirituality into the rhythm of society. Chapter 93. Ancient Egyptian embalming included drying bodies with natron, a naturally occurring salt. Combined with oils and resins, it prevented decay. Priests applied precise techniques over weeks. Mummification required understanding chemical reactions and anatomy. This process preserved physical structure while serving spiritual purposes. Embalming was a blend of biology, chemistry, and ritual, demonstrating that Egyptians systematically applied observation and experimentation to ensure preservation and connect with the divine. Chapter 94. Temples were designed as instruments of light and sound. Chambers captured sunlight at solstices, while acoustics amplified chants. Architects calculated angles, dimensions, and materials to achieve desired effects. Science, art, and religion merged seamlessly. Observing natural phenomena guided construction, enhancing ritual experience. Egyptians applied geometry, physics, and astronomy practically. Sacred spaces weren't just symbolic, they were laboratories of perception, showing the civilization's ability to transform observation into meaningful architectural design. Chapter 95. Egyptian medicine included practical surgery. Archaeological evidence shows trepanation, sutures, and wound treatment using copper tools. Understanding anatomy, hygiene, and material properties was essential. Procedures were systematic, combining observation, experimentation, and ritual. Medical texts documented techniques for consistency. Surgery wasn't abstract, it was applied science, demonstrating Egyptians' empirical approach to healthcare, blending practical knowledge with spiritual guidance to maintain life, health, and social stability. Chapter 96. The Nile Delta supported complex ecosystems. Egyptians observed fish, birds, and plants for food, medicine, and construction. Seasonal cycles were tracked for agriculture and rituals. Knowledge of natural patterns informed pest control, irrigation, and breeding. Observation, experimentation, and adaptation were essential. Egyptians merged ecology, economy, and religion, demonstrating practical environmental science. Understanding biodiversity wasn't theoretical. It was embedded in survival, culture, and daily life, shaping one of history's most resilient civilizations. Chapter 97. Hieroglyphs recorded engineering and scientific knowledge. Pyramids, temples, and canals were described with precise dimensions and materials. Symbols allowed knowledge transfer across generations. Scribes documented methods, ensuring accuracy and continuity. Writing preserved observations, experiments, and innovations systematically. Egyptians combined literacy, mathematics, and applied science in their records. Knowledge was encoded in artful symbols, demonstrating that communication, observation, and empirical thinking were central to sustaining civilization. Chapter 98. Ancient Egyptian music involved harmonic ratios, resonance, and rhythm. Harps, flutes, and drums produced specific tones for rituals and entertainment. Sound influenced spiritual experience, healing, and social cohesion. Instruments were crafted with material science and geometry in mind. Musicians observed vibration and resonance to optimize performance. Music was an intersection of science, art, and spirituality, showing Egyptians' ability to apply empirical understanding to cultural expression, ritual, and daily life. Chapter 99. Obelisks served as astronomical markers. Shadows tracked solstices, seasons, and ceremonial timings. Erecting massive stones required understanding balance, leverage, and stone properties. Geometry, physics, and observation guided placement. Obelisks communicated power, devotion, and scientific mastery simultaneously. Egyptians integrated applied science into monumental architecture, blending engineering, astronomy, and ritual. These structures measured, inspired, and instructed, revealing a civilization where knowledge and symbolism were inseparable. Chapter 100. Beer, bread, and fermentation reflect Egyptian chemistry. Brewers observed yeast activity, temperature, and timing to produce consistent beverages and food. Recipes were documented on papyrus for accuracy. Fermentation was an experiment in biology and chemistry, applied to daily life, ritual, and trade. Egyptians combined observation, trial, and methodology to optimize production. Practical science was embedded in sustenance, showing that experimentation, culture, and survival were tightly intertwined in everyday life. Thank you for exploring the 100 secrets of ancient Egypt with us. From the Nile to the pyramids, these stories remind us how observation, innovation, and belief built a civilization that still amazes today. Stay curious, keep exploring, and join us next time for more journeys through history's hidden truths.